Welcome to Highline Excel 2013 class video number 2. Hey, if you want to download this workbook and follow along, click on the link below the video. In this video, we want to talk about formula elements, formula types, and we're going to look at 12 examples. Here's the table of contents for this whole week 2. We're going to start by going over and clicking on the sheet Formula Notes. Now, these are some notes. If you Control P, you can see that I've done page setup. There's 3 pages kind of condensed notes just of what type of things can go into formulas. I clicked Escape there. As we mentioned last week, Excel's golden rule goes back to the original idea that Bricklin and Frankston had when they invented VisiCalc, the first spreadsheet. Excel's golden rule: if a formula input can change, put it in a cell and refer to it in your formula with a cell reference. If the data will not change, then you can hard code it into your formula. We saw an example last week, and we'll see an example in just a moment when we go over and look at our examples. In fact, it'll be our first example. But there's another part to this golden rule. And always label the formula elements and the cells with the calculations. Yeah, you don't want to just have a cell with some numbers in it. You always want to put labels next to the formula inputs and formulas so you know exactly what's going on. And every example we ever do in this class virtually will follow this rule. Types of formulas. We're going to look at all 5 different types of formulas in our examples. We have calculating formulas. Those are formulas that produce numbers. Logical formulas, they produce trues or falses. Text formulas, yes, you can have formulas that actually create text, like words. Lookup formulas, formulas that go look something up, get it, and bring it back to the cell. And even advanced formula type called array formulas. In this class, we'll get at least an introduction to array formulas. And in our examples, we'll see one simple example of an array formula. Now, before we start with formulas, sometimes it's quite helpful to know what are the different things that you can have in a formula. Equal signs, every formula starts with an equal sign as the first character in the cell. We can have cell references, math operators, numbers typed directly in formulas if they are formula inputs that don't change, functions, the if function, countif, sum function, average, function argument elements. We saw last week how the last argument in VLOOKUP required a false or a 0. Comparative operators, the join operator, ampersand, text within quotes, and even array constants. We will see at least one example of all of these just coming up in our examples over on this sheet. Here's the list of math operators. Here's the list of comparative operators. So as we mentioned in 216, there's no greater than or equal symbol that's a single character, so you have to type a greater than and then an equal. All right, so the rest of that we covered last week. Let's go over to the sheet examples of formulas. All right, our first example, something we've done before, but it'll help illustrate a calculating formula. That's a formula that spits out a number answer. And here's all the formula elements we'll see. So here in cell C8, I want to calculate hours worked. There's time in, time out. Notice the labels, right? Here's our formula inputs. So in cell C8, I'm going to say equals. And we always have to take, when we're doing time math, the later time minus the earlier time, if we want to calculate the difference between those two times, which is the hours worked. As we saw last week, times are decimals that express the proportion of the 24-hour day worked. So of course, when we do the subtraction, we have to multiply the answer times 24 to get our integer. Now, you have to know your order of operations, math order of operations. Parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, left to right, and adding and subtracting left to right. So since multiplying would come before subtraction, and we need the subtraction to come first, we are going to put parentheses around this formula. So we have an equal sign, some parentheses, cell references, a math operator subtraction, math operator multiplying, and a number typed directly into the formula. 24 hours in a day is not something that will change anytime soon, so we can type it directly into our formula. When I hit enter, boom, 5 hours. That is what we worked. If we changed the formula input to say 9, it would instantly change to 4. Control Z. Now, we have gross pay. We have an integer, number of hours worked, and our wage per hour. So we can simply multiply wage per hour times number of hours. So we have an equal sign, cell references, and a math operator. Now notice that both of these are calculating formulas that spit out numbers. So of course the numbers are always aligned to the right. Let's go look at our next example for calculating formula. Here we have a list of sales rep, one name each. Over here we have a data set. Field names at the top, transactions in rows. Each one of these represents a sale. So if we want to count how many sales each sales rep had, we can simply use a formula that has the criteria input Chun Fei, and we'll tell the formula to look through this whole column here. And every time it finds a Chun Fei, it'll count, and then it will count the total. All right, and then we want to be able to have that formula and copy it down. Wow, the count, not count, that's for number, not count, that's for non-empty cells, not count blank. We're interested in count if the sales rep directly to our left is found in the column. Now, the range, I'm going to click in the top cell, H27, Control-Shift down arrow, and F4 key to lock it and put those dollar signs, because as we copy it down, we need it locked there. Absolute cell reference. Comma, and then our criteria, that is a relative cell reference. So as we copy the formula down, each new cell, each new row will be a new criteria, a new sales rep name. All right, so we have an equal sign, COUNTIF function, absolute range, and a relative cell reference. Control Enter, double click and send it down. So we get our count, and of course it's a number, so by default it's aligned to the right. I'm going to go to the last cell and hit F2 and admire my handiwork. It looks like it's been locked perfectly on the column with the sales rep name, and the criteria moved relatively as we copied it down. Enter. All right, let's look at our next example, which is a text formula. Now here's the situation. Product ID. There are so many different conventions for product ID. One convention is that the product ID is made up of different parts. In this example, the last two characters of each product ID tell the business where they purchased this product, which state. And so here we need to extract from this text item just the last two characters. So we have a column filled with state abbreviations. And then we could do something like count how many are in California, in Washington, etc. So we're going to create a text function. And guess what? All of these product IDs follow the same pattern. The abbreviation for state is the last two characters. Now, coming from the left, coming from the right, we're going to use the right function. It is a text function. You give it some text, and you say, from the right, how many number of characters do you want me to go and get? 2. Close parentheses, Control Enter. It will extract only the right 2 characters from each text string. So I double click and send it down. I'm going to put the last cell in edit mode. I hit the F2 key. Now notice we have an equal sign, the right function, a cell reference, and that is a number input that will not change, right? State abbreviation is always going to be 2. All right, let's go look at another text example. Now this is the reverse. We have product code here, the first two parts, and state abbreviation. And we need to create our product ID. That means we need to take whatever's in this cell and join them into one cell. There is a join operator. It is the ampersand. Shift 7 equal, and I'm going to say give me relative cell reference 2 to my left, and then ampersand or the join symbol. And I'm going to join with it relative cell reference 1 to my left. Control Enter. Double click and send it down. So that is amazing. We created a text formula. Everything's by default aligned to the left. I click in the last cell in F2, equal sign cell reference, and the ampersand join symbol, and then a second cell reference. All right, let's look at our next example. We have two formulas. We want to look at a logical formula and then a text formula. Now here's the situation. We have maximum calls allowed. In each employee, we have how many calls they've made. So we want to ask the question, have they exceeded the maximum calls allowed? So if we had a formula here, we want it to deliver false. They have not passed the maximum calls allowed. Here, for the second employee, this person has exceeded. Their number of calls have exceeded the maximum, so we want a true here. A logical formula. I'm going to type in equal sign and go say, hey, is that number of calls allowed for the employee greater than, that's a comparative operator, the maximum calls allowed? And I'm going to lock this with the F4 key. Now we have an equal sign, relative cell reference, a comparative operator, and an absolute cell reference. Because we have a comparative operator, it will deliver a true or false. Those are the only two possibilities. Control Enter, double click and send it down. Go to the last cell, F2. Absolutely beautiful. Now, this is true and false. It's a logical formula. A lot of times you don't want true and false, but you want some text. So here I want under, here I want over. So here I have a situation where each one of these cells gets one of two things, the text under or the text over. So I'm going to build a formula and use the if function. If function is perfect for putting one of two things in the cell. Now this logical test is exactly like our logical formula. Instead of logical formula in a cell delivering true or false, the logical test will deliver a true or false to the if, and then we'll tell the if what do you want to see in the cell if it's true, and what do you want to see in the cell if it's false. So the same exact test. Relative cell reference, are you greater than, have you exceeded the maximum calls allowed? F4. Notice the logical test, comma, what do we want to put in the cell if it's true? That means they have exceeded. I want the word over, and I'm going to put it in double quotes. Anytime you have text in text in a formula, you have to type it in double quotes. Now, this is an example of something. This is a formula input, and since for our situation this is never going to change, we're always using over or under, we're going to type it directly into the formula. If this was text that changed, then we put it into a cell reference, put a label, and refer to it with a cell reference. So, value if false, that means they have not exceeded the limit. We put under, close parentheses, control enter, double click and send it down. Absolutely perfect. And notice this is a greater than, so if you get exactly 45, so if this person get exactly 45, it better say under. It is only when you exceed 45 that you have exceeded the limit. I'm going to control Z. All right, so here we have a logical formula. Here we have a text formula. Notice that logicals or trues or falses, or they're also called Boolean. Boolean is, and we'll talk about that later when we look at the sum product and array formulas. But Boolean just is a fancy way to say true and false. Boolean is actually the name of a mathematician. All right, so we have Boolean or logical values, and they're always centered and capitalized. And over here we have a text formula, a line to the left. All right, let's go look at our next example. We're going to look at a lookup formula. All right, here's our goal for this lookup formula. We need to get the phone number and email for Joanne. So our formula is going to have to look up Joanne, go through the first column, find a match, and then go from the first to the second to the third column and get the telephone number and bring it back to this cell. For email, it'll have to look up Joanne, find Joanne in the first column, and go from 1, 2, 3, fourth column, get the email, and bring it back to the cell. All right, so our table is orientated vertically up and down, so we use the V lookup function. All right, so just like we did last week, lookup value. Hey, we're going to look something up. In this case, a name. Now I'm going to copy this formula to the side, so I'm going to hit the F4 key to lock it, comma. VLOOKUP needs to know where the table is. First column has the items we're looking up. Any subsequent columns have items we're going to go get and retrieve and bring back to the cell. I'm going to lock this, F4, comma, column index. Well, for phone number, it's 1, 2, 3. This column index tells the VLOOKUP which one of these columns has the thing you want to go get and bring back to the cell. I'm going to type a 3, comma. Range lookup is a function argument element that we have to give it. It can do two types of lookup. Approximate match is for commissions or taxes. Exact match is when you're looking up an exact something. In our case, we're looking up exactly the name Joanne. So we're either going to accept false, or you can use a 0. True is 1, false is 0. So I'm going to use a 0. The reason I tend to use 0 instead of false is because there's other lookup functions we'll learn about later that use a 0 for false. Either one's fine in the VLOOKUP function. All right, ready? Close parentheses. We have an equal sign, the VLOOKUP function. Absolute cell reference, absolute range, a number that's not going to change, and a function argument element. Control Enter. Now when I copy this over, it won't work, but watch this. I'm going to hit the F2 key, and I'm going to change this to a 4. Now, next week when we really dive into lookup functions, we'll see how to automate this process so we don't have to go and edit each formula and change it 3, 4. But for our purposes right here, that's perfectly all right because the email is in the 4th column, and that's not going to change. Now notice when I enter that, both of these items are aligned to the left. They're text. So even though this looks like a number, because there are dashes in between the numbers, that's considered text also. They're both text. Now if I come over here and change this to Joe, boom, it looks up the telephone number and email address for Joe. Now, because we have our table right here on this sheet, instead of risking mistyping, there's no who in this column. So we don't want to allow that. We want to add data validation that will only allow the names from our table over here. I'm going to Control Z. We can simply go up to Home ribbon, Data ribbon. Data tools, we have data validation, data validation. Now, this will allow us to not have any value, but from the drop-down we can select list. Then our source, you can go get cell references from our worksheet. I'm going to highlight that first column. Not only that, look at that, an in-cell drop-down. So when I click OK, data validation list. Now I can select anybody from this list, and just like that, I've looked up the phone number and email. Let's go look at our next example. Example 9. It's going to be another calculating example. Here we have revenue and 3 expenses. And our goal is to calculate net income. Now, there's a few ways we can do this. And actually, I think I'll do one of 2 different ways for this example. The first one is I'll say, hey, equals, and we'll take the revenue, and we'll subtract each one of the expenses. So we have equal sign, cell references, and 3 subtraction math operators. Now that'll get me the right answer, 9,240. An alternative and slightly more robust method would be to do this. Hey, equals, and we'll still get the same revenue minus. Instead of subtracting each one individually, we'll add them first using the sum function. Yes, we can put a function as a formula element in a larger formula. So now the range, I'm simply going to highlight the range of expenses. So here we have an equal sign, a cell reference, a math operator, the sum function, and a range of cells. Control Enter. Now that is more robust. What does robust mean? It means it's harder to break. Now here's the situation. It's often the case. We have some expenses here, but we forgot one. So we come over and we click on our row header, right click, insert. And we insert a row. Now this is temporarily going to mess this data set up over here, so we're just pretending like that isn't here. But here's our template. We forgot an expense, so we insert it and we say, hey, we forgot wage expense. And it's 7,000 bucks. Now when I hit enter, watch these 2 cells. Sum function, minus, minus, minus. F2, the sum function picked it up because we had cell reference colon cell reference, however many rows we insert or delete, it'll automatically update. Escape, F2. This one has no way of knowing that there was a new expense or a new row inserted. So the sum function is much more robust. Now, how about we Control Z, Z, Z? Just for kicks, let's look at a different way. If you did have a data set here, oh, I forgot. Highlight and watch this. You can move using your move cursor. I'm pointing towards the edge of the highlighted range. Drag down. That'll do the same thing. Now, it means that I have to go redo my formatting and then type Wade 7000. When I hit enter, instantly this one updates. Even when I just moved it, it still did the same thing. The two bookends, meaning the cell reference colon cell references, handled it perfectly. This one had no idea. All right, this one, more robust. Love using that sum function inside of a larger formula. Hey, our next example is going to be an array formula, and this one will also have an example where we use a function inside of a larger formula. All right, now an array formula is a special type of formula that makes an array operation, and it delivers a bunch of answers all at the same time. Now, we are going to look at the large function, and our goal here is to add the top 3 cells. So if we were doing this manually, we'd do something like this. We'd actually have to look through this column and figure out the 3 biggest ones. Oh, that'd be terrible with a huge column. But notice we have 3 values. We need our formula, or something inside of our formula called a formula element, that will go and find the 3 biggest numbers and deliver 3, in essence, answers to the sum function. All right, we want to take a look at the large function. The large function is great. You give it a range of values, comma, and then the k is asking, hey, do you want the first largest, the second largest, the third largest? If I give it a 1, it does the same thing as the max function. It'll find the biggest value. And in this case, it is 172. Instead of 1, if I give the k argument a 2, it'll find the second biggest. Oh, look, it found the 170. If I give it the third biggest, you get the idea. Whoops, that's the 32 biggest. That's a good example. The num arrow means it can't figure out that number because there isn't a 32nd biggest. But here, if I get rid of that 2, now it'll give me the third biggest. Now, that's not really what we want. We want to add the top 3 cells, so we need all 3 numbers simultaneously. Well, check this out. If we came to the k argument and said 1, 2, 3, well, that won't work at all because commas are reserved to separate arguments. But you can wrap the 1, 2, 3. In essence, it's an array of items we want to put into the k argument. If you wrap them in curly brackets, now the function will understand. This is called an array constant. That k argument is expecting a single number. If you want to give it more than one number and have the large function deliver the first, second, and third largest numbers simultaneously, curly bracket, number, comma, number, comma, number, end curly bracket. Now watch this. If I hit enter, well, it's not going to give us the right answer right off the bat. But notice, it's only giving me one number. A cell cannot display 3 numbers simultaneously. Here's our trick, because I want to show you that the large function actually did go and get all 3. If you highlight it and you use the F9 key, the F9 key is the evaluate key. Ready? F9. Oh, it is delivering 1, 2, 3. Because we gave the k argument 3 numbers, the large function spits out 3 answers. If we had given it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it would spit out 5 answers. In fact, let's just try it. 4, 5. Array, meaning we're giving this argument an array of numbers. We're instructing the large function to therefore give us 5 answers simultaneously. This is an example of an array formula. The array operation is the fact that we told the k argument we gave it an array of numbers. Therefore, the large function will spit out an array of answers. Now, we want to stay with 1, 2, 3. Since we want to add them, what do? We put the large function inside the sum function. Remember, when we hit enter, the cell can't display them all three at one time, but the sum function knows exactly what to do with three numbers. Now, here's another cool trick. If you have your screen tip for your sum function, if you click on the argument, it will automatically highlight whatever's sitting in that argument. If I hit F9, hey, the sum function has no problem with lots of numbers. That's what it's programmed to do. See all the numbers, add them up. Now I'm going to Control Z. Anytime you do that F9 trick, you have to Control Z. You don't want to leave it hard-coded in, and enter. There we go. If I were to change this number to 5,000, instantly we would still get the top 5,000, whereas this formula wouldn't work at all. I'm going to Control Z. All right, so F2. We had a sum function and a large function, a range of values, and what's called an array constant. Enter. All right, let's go look at our next example. All right, example 11. This is going to be a calculating formula. Here are our formula elements we're going to see, and here's our goal. We need to add with two criteria or two conditions. We need to find and then add all of the number of crates from this column, where we find an apple in the product column and a Monday in the day sold column. So here's our two conditions or two criteria. We have to match how many items in this column equal apple and how many items in this column equal Monday. So when the formula does this, it's going to say, is the first transaction, is the item in the product column equal to apple? True. Is the day equal to Monday? True. So this one is actually taken and added. Is this one equal to apple? False. Is this one equal to Monday? False. So it gets two falses. Here it got two trues. Here it's going to get a true on the apple, but a false on the Monday, so it's not included. Only when it gets true, true, does it take the associated number and add. We can use the sum ifs. And the if does one condition. The ifs does one or more conditions or criteria. The sum range, that's the numbers you want to add. Comma, criteria range 1. It doesn't matter in which order you do this. This is called and criteria, A and D, because both conditions must be met. When you do and criteria, it doesn't matter in which order you do it. I'm going to start with the product column. Notice it says criteria range. When it says range, that means that's all of them, comma. And then criteria 1, hey, that's the apple, comma. Then we have our criteria range 2, the days sold column. You don't need the field names, comma. And then criteria 2, that's the Monday. And that will do it for our sum ifs. As long as you read the screen tips, this is a pretty easy function to do. Close parentheses, Control Enter. And we can see, if we added these in our head, we get 695. Here's another cool trick. Status bar. There's one number, nothing shows up, but I'm going to hold my Control and click on the other number. Instantly, I have a bunch of calculations in the status bar. Average, count, numerical count, min, max, and the sum. So we're checking it using the status bar. If I change this to orange, I get 2. Oh, there's only one. Let's try it. Orange is on Wednesday. There we go. So, and we'll see how to do this conditional formatting based on criteria later in this class. Sum ifs, great function, adding with one or more conditions. We just have a bunch of ranges and cell references. Enter. All right, let's look at our last example for this video. Hey, it's another calculating formula. Here are the formula elements. Now, in this case, we're going to count with two conditions. But our conditions, both conditions are going to look at the same column. Here's a bunch of grades, and all I want to know is how many grades are between 4 and 3.5, and then count. How many grades are between 3.5 and 3? How many grades are between 3 and 2.5? Now, when you have a lower and upper limit, you have to be careful and include and be careful about your comparative operators. Notice I have a 3.5 here and a 3.5 here. This is the lower limit, but for the next category it's the upper limit. If you have this situation, you can have the equal sign on only one of them. If I had the equal sign here, that means we have the potential of double counting, because 3.5 would be counted here and here. Now, some situations you want the upper limit, some situations you want the lower limit. It's up to the particular calculating situation. All right, but notice I put the comparative operator and the number, in the cell, which makes the formula easier to create. Next week in week 3, we'll see how to put numbers in the cell and then actually add the comparative operators inside the formula. But if you can do it this way, this is nice and easy. All right, you ready? I'm counting here, so I'm going to count if with an S. One or more condition. Criteria range, highlight the numbers, Control-Shift down arrow, comma. Oh, I forgot to lock it. If you forget to lock it, one way you can go back and lock it is by highlighting just the colon and then hit the F4 key. If you can't quite highlight the colon, you can highlight the whole range and hit the F4 key. That'll lock them both. If you have your cursor on just one of the cell references, when you hit F4, it will lock only one of the cell references. So if you do that by accident, you need to then click over here and do that one too. All right. So whichever way you do it, whoop, make sure we lock it. I forgot to lock it. All right, so column with criteria. I'm going to do the upper limit. Remember, with and criteria, both of these have to be true. It doesn't matter which order. Control-Shift down arrow, F4. That's the criteria range 2, comma, and the comparative operator and the number. Close parentheses. Control-Enter. Double-click and send it down. I'm going to the last one and hitting F2. Okay, it looks like I got the 2 criteria right and the 2 columns right locked down. Now let's take just a little bit closer look and see how this formula actually calculated. Because look, there's a single column with 2 conditions. Well, every single number in this column got asked 2 questions. Let's take the first one, 2.1. Is 2.1 less than or equal to 3? True. Is it greater than 2.5? False. Because we didn't get 2 trues, that 2.1 is not part of the count. If we go to this 3.5, it asks the question, are you less than or equal to 3? False. As soon as you get even a single false, it's out. It's not being counted. What about this 2.8? We had to ask 2 questions of that 2.8. Is 2.8 less than or equal to 3? True. Is it greater than 2.5? True, because it got 2 trues for our 2 questions. It got counted by COUNTIF, and it went through and asked every single number those same 2 questions. How many were there? There were 4 grades, less than or equal to 3 and greater than 2.5. All right, so in this video, if we go back to our formula notes, we saw 5 types of formulas, and we saw all 10 examples of the different types of formula elements that can go into formulas. Now in our next video, we'll talk about how formulas calculate. All right, we'll see you next video.